July 1954. Overton Park Shell, Memphis. 1,400 people screaming. Elvis Presley moves on stage and the crowd loses control. Dewey Phillips on WHBQ plays "That's All Right," and the phone lines explode. But rewind 6 months. January 1954. Elvis walked into every label in Memphis carrying the same acetate demo disc. Columbia. "We already have a country boy singer." Decca. "Not commercial enough." Capitol. "Interesting, but no." They heard what he wasn't. Now those same labels are in a bidding war. The acetate he made for his mother? Still in her house, grooves worn from replaying. Stage lights hit Elvis mid-move, and backstage in the dressing room, that same demo disc sits on a shelf. 18 months between invisibility and inevitability. What did they miss that the crowd heard instantly? This is what happened in between. By late November 1953, Elvis had saved enough from his Crown Electric paychecks to afford something he'd been thinking about for months. Memphis Recording Service on Union Avenue offered a deal. $3.98 for 2 songs on acetate. He told himself it was a gift for his mother. It was, but it was also a test. Could his voice hold up when it was just him and a microphone? He walked in wearing work clothes, traces of electrical wire dust still on his hands. Marion Keisker sat at the front desk. She watched him set up, nervous, adjusting the mic 3 times before the engineer told him to relax. He recorded "My Happiness" and "That's When Your Heartaches Begin." His voice had something. She couldn't place it exactly, but she made a secret copy anyway. Wrote "Good Ballad Singer" on a slip of paper and clipped it to the disc. Sam Phillips, who owned Sun Records in the same building, was too busy that day to listen. Elvis took the original acetate home in a paper sleeve. That night, he played it for Gladys. She cried. He played it again the next night, and the night after that. Each replay left microscopic scratches in the grooves. Between January and March 1954, Elvis made the rounds. He carried that same acetate to every label office in Memphis, the paper sleeve getting softer from handling, corners bent from being tucked under his arm. Columbia Records first. The executive listened for 30 seconds, maybe less. "We have enough country singers." Elvis didn't argue, just nodded, slid the disc back into the sleeve, left. Decca was next. Different office, same response. Not commercial, too raw. They wanted polish. They wanted Perry Como smoothness. They heard Hank Snow in their heads and compared Elvis to that template. He didn't fit. Capitol Records gave him the longest listen, almost a full minute. "Interesting voice," the A&R man said, but no. Elvis walked out each time without protest. Later, people would say he should have fought harder, should have convinced them. But you can't convince someone to hear what they're not listening for. The acetate was getting worn now, small pops and clicks forming in the quieter passages. At night, back in his small apartment, he'd play it and wonder if maybe they were right. Maybe he should just stick to trucks and wiring. The Grand Ole Opry would reject him too, months later in October, after a single performance. But that January, walking out of the 3rd or 4th label office with his demo under his arm, he didn't know the rejection was only beginning. He thought he just needed one yes. Marion Keisker couldn't stop thinking about the voice. Weeks passed. Sam Phillips kept saying the same thing he'd been saying for months. "If I could find a white man with the Negro sound and the Negro feel, I'd make $1 billion. It wasn't about race for Sam. It was about breaking through the ceiling of what white audiences would accept. Marion remembered the kid with the work clothes. She pulled out the copy she'd made, brought it to Sam's attention again. "What about this one?" Sam listened this time, said, "Maybe," then filed it again. Elvis didn't know any of this was happening. He kept working at Crown Electric, $1.25 an hour, climbing poles and running wire through Memphis attics in the summer heat. 3 more months passed. The acetate sat in Marion's desk drawer. Sun Records was struggling. Sam needed a hit, needed something that could break through. The financial pressure was mounting. Every week without a breakthrough meant closer to closing. Marion knew this. She kept thinking about that voice, the way it didn't quite fit anywhere, which meant maybe it could fit everywhere. Late March, she brought the disc to Sam again. This time, something clicked. Maybe it was desperation. Maybe it was timing. Sam looked at the paper sleeve, at Marion's handwritten note. He said he'd call the kid. The breakthrough wasn't Elvis pushing harder. It was Marion refusing to forget. June 1954. The phone rang in Elvis's apartment. Sam Phillips on the line. Want to try something at the studio? Elvis showed up the next day carrying the original acetate. Proof he was serious. Proof he'd been ready all along. The first session was stiff. Too polished. Too careful. Sam stopped him halfway through a song. What do you really like to sing? Elvis mentioned Arthur Crudup, blues singers, rhythm stuff he'd heard on Beale Street. Sam called in Scotty Moore on guitar and Bill Black on bass. They tried That's All Right, loose, raw, electric. Something happened in that room. The formality broke. Elvis moved different, sounded different. The acetate sat on a studio shelf during the session, silent witness to what it had started. Sam recorded the whole thing on tape, played it back. Even Elvis looked surprised. The song had energy, something wild and uncontained. It wasn't what labels had been looking for, which meant it might be exactly what audiences wanted. Sam knew radio was the test. If this could get on air and people responded, then maybe he had something. If not, it was just another interesting failure in a studio full of them. But sitting there, listening to the playback, all three of them felt it. The breakthrough wasn't polish. It was permission to be raw. Sam pressed acetates of That's All Right for radio distribution. One of them went to Dewey Phillips, no relation to Sam, who had the wildest show on Memphis radio. If anyone would play something this strange, it was Dewey. July 5th, 1954. Dewey Phillips played That's All Right on his Red Hot and Blue show. The station's phones lit up within minutes. People calling in, asking who this was, where they could buy it. Some thought he was black, the sound, the rhythm, the feel. Dewey played it again, then again. 14 times that night, by most counts. Elvis wasn't listening. He was hiding in a movie theater, too nervous to hear his own song on the radio. His mother knew where he was. Dewey sent someone to find him, dragged him to the station for a live interview. On air, Dewey made sure to mention Hume's high school, establishing that Elvis was white, which mattered in 1954 Memphis. The song sold 20,000 copies locally in the first weeks. The acetate that had been rejected by every label 6 months earlier was now a historical artifact, the first physical evidence of a sound that was about to reshape everything. Radio didn't care what record executives thought. Radio cared what made phones ring. And this made phones ring. The original demo was still at Elvis's apartment, but its role had changed. It was no longer a calling card. It was proof of concept. Proof that the mistake the labels heard was exactly what audiences wanted. By late July, regional labels started paying attention. The same executives who'd said no were now asking Sam Phillips about the kid with the strange voice. What had changed? Nothing about the music, everything about the context. The song was the same, but now it had evidence behind it, proof that it worked. Summer into fall, 1954. Elvis was touring the South, small venues, growing crowds. Columbia sent scouts. So did Decca. Capitol suddenly remembered they'd heard him before, said they'd been wrong. Same offices, same executives who'd dismissed him 8 months earlier. Now they wanted contracts. They wanted to shape him, smooth him out, make him fit the format they'd been using for years. Sam Phillips refused every offer. Not because he didn't need the money, Sun Records was barely staying afloat, but because he knew what would happen if Elvis signed with a major label. They'd sand off the edges, turn him into another clean-cut country singer. The Louisiana Hayride, a radio show broadcast across the South, signed Elvis in October. More exposure, more crowds. The stack of contract offers on Sam's desk kept growing. He didn't respond to most of them. He was waiting for something, though he couldn't articulate what. A bigger offer, maybe. Or just the right moment. Elvis kept performing, kept driving back and forth across the South in whatever car he could borrow. The acetate from November 1953 was still in his mother's house, now a relic from a different life. 18 months earlier, he'd carried it office to office, hoping for one yes. Now the yeses were coming from everywhere, and he didn't know which one to take. The pressure was building. Success was here, but it came with impossible choices. Stay with Sam, who believed first, or move to a major label with national distribution and real money. The labels didn't want to change him anymore. They wanted to own him. Late 1954, RCA Victor entered the hunt. Steve Sholes, an A&R man from New York, saw Elvis perform at the Louisiana Hayride in Shreveport, Louisiana, watched the crowd lose control. Sholes made calls, started putting together an offer. $25,000 for Elvis's contract, plus all the Sun recordings. For context, most artists were signing for $5,000, maybe $10,000. Sam Phillips was torn. He needed money desperately. Sun was always one bad month from closing. But Elvis was breaking out. If Sam held on just a little longer, maybe the price would go higher. Then Colonel Tom Parker showed up. Parker was a manager, a promoter, a hustler with connections across the South. He saw something bigger than regional success. He saw national television, movies, a brand. Parker started negotiating on Elvis's behalf, though Elvis hadn't officially hired him yet. The offers kept climbing. $30,000, $35,000. Elvis was still driving a truck part-time, still living in the same small apartment, completely unaware of his actual value. Blue Moon of Kentucky was selling across the South. Radio stations from Texas to Florida were playing his songs. The acetate that started everything was locked away now, too valuable to risk. RCA kept revising their contract offer, numbers climbing in the margins of each draft. Sam watched Elvis's value double every few weeks. The problem wasn't finding buyers. The problem was that Elvis's worth was accelerating faster than anyone could measure. Every performance added another zero. Every crowd that screamed added leverage. Nobody could pin down what he was actually worth because the ceiling kept rising. January 1955. Colonel Tom Parker, now officially Elvis's manager, studied the entire timeline. He understood something crucial. Rejection made better mythology than discovery. The story wasn't just, talented kid makes it. The story was, every label said no, now they're all begging. Parker started leaking details to music journalists, mentioned casually that Columbia had passed, that Decca had called Elvis not commercial, that Capitol had said no 3 times. He framed it perfectly. Elvis wasn't sold to labels. He was stolen from them, by the only man smart enough to hear it. Sam Phillips became the genius who saw what others missed. The rejection letters, Parker tracked them all down, became weapons. When labels called with new offers, Parker would mention their earlier passes. Remember when your A&R man said he should stick to trucks? He kept the original acetate story in rotation too. The $4 demo that nobody wanted, now worth more than the yearly salary of the executives who'd rejected it. Parker wasn't selling Elvis's talent. He was selling the label executive's mistake. The mythology built itself. Underdog kid, blind industry, one man who believed. By mid-1955, Parker had reframed the entire narrative. The acetate was moved to a safe, literally, a locked safe in Sam's office. It wasn't just a demo anymore. It was an artifact, proof of the greatest miss in music industry history. RCA kept raising their offer. Other labels tried to match. But Parker knew the weapon wasn't Elvis's voice. The weapon was their shame. Make them pay to erase the memory of saying no. Spring 1955. Elvis's performances were getting wilder. Crowds weren't just listening. They were screaming, fainting, rushing the stage. Television appearances were being scheduled. Milton Berle show, Steve Allen show. The major labels saw what was coming. Elvis on national TV meant Elvis in every American home. The offers hit $35,000, then $40,000. Sam Phillips knew he couldn't compete anymore. Sun Records didn't have national distribution. He could keep Elvis and watch him outgrow the label, or sell now and use the money to build something sustainable. Elvis was caught in the middle. Loyalty to Sam, who'd believed when no one else did, versus the chance to actually reach the audience that was already waiting for him. Baby Let's Play House hit the country charts in May. More proof that this wasn't regional anymore. The acetate from November 1953 was pulled out for comparison. Journalists wanted to hear the before, wanted to document the transformation. But when Sam played the original demo next to the new RCA master recordings, the difference wasn't quality. The voice was the same. The feel was the same. The only thing that had changed was the world's willingness to hear it. Success meant leaving the man who believed first. That was the cost. Sam knew it. Elvis knew it. Parker definitely knew it. The meeting where they discussed the RCA deal happened in the same Sun studio where Elvis had recorded his first real session. Full circle. The acetate sat on the shelf, same spot as before, watching the end of one chapter and the beginning of something none of them could fully imagine yet. November 1955. The RCA deal closed, $40,000 total, unprecedented for a relatively unknown artist. $5,000 went directly to Elvis as a signing bonus. He'd never seen that much money in his life. His mother cried when he showed her the check. Sam Phillips took his share and immediately started planning. He'd use the money to sign other artists. Johnny Cash was already in the studio. Jerry Lee Lewis was coming up. The sale of Elvis would fund the next generation of rock and roll. The signing happened at Sun Studio. Same room, same walls that had witnessed the first uncertain acetate recording 2 years earlier. Elvis put his signature on the RCA contract, and everything shifted. Colonel Parker had already booked a national tour. RCA scheduled Elvis's first session for January 1956. That session would produce Heartbreak Hotel. The original acetate was framed now, hung on the wall behind where Elvis signed. Visible in photos from that day, if you look close enough. A reminder of how far $4 and 2 songs could travel if they survived long enough. The disc was priceless now, historically, financially, symbolically. It represented the entire compressed arc: rejection, persistence, discovery, vindication. Parker made sure journalists knew the acetate story, made sure every article mentioned the labels that said no. The loss for Sun Records became the win for rock and roll itself. Sam got cash to build his empire. Elvis got the platform he needed, and RCA got the artist who would define the next decade. The acetate survived it all. The doubt, the replays, the heat, the moves. Still intact, still playable, now immortal. Early 1956. Every label that had rejected Elvis was now desperate. Columbia called Sam Phillips directly. "We'll match anything RCA offered." Sam reminded them they'd already had their chance. Decca executives reached out to Colonel Parker. Name your price for his next contract after RCA. Parker kept a file of their old rejection letters, framed them in his office. When label representatives came to negotiate, he'd point at the frames. "Remember when your guy said he should stick to driving trucks?" The leverage was total. Capitol Records sent flowers and gift baskets to Parker's office, trying to rebuild the relationship. Parker sent them back with notes thanking them for their earlier honesty. He was playing a longer game. Every public rejection story made Elvis more valuable. By March 1956, Heartbreak Hotel hit #1. The song played everywhere: radio, jukeboxes, television. RCA made their investment back in weeks. The labels that passed weren't just losing Elvis. They were losing the entire sound, the entire audience that wanted something rawer and more real. The rejection became industry legend. Every A&R meeting, every talent discussion, someone would bring up the Elvis mistake. Don't trust your first instinct. Don't dismiss the weird ones. The acetate from Memphis Recording Service, November 1953, was now valueless in dollar terms. You couldn't put a price on it because it was history itself. But it represented something clearer than money. Proof that expertise can be blindness, that the safe choice costs more than the risk. The labels weren't begging for Elvis anymore. They were begging to erase their own mistake. Parker wouldn't let them forget. Between 1956 and 1957, Elvis became the biggest star on the planet. RCA made over $20 million from his recordings in those first 2 years. The return on a $40,000 investment defied logic. Meanwhile, Columbia Records pivoted to Johnny Mathis, safe, smooth, exactly what they'd wanted Elvis to be. Decca scrambled, signed Bill Haley, but the moment had passed. Capitol kept trying to find the next Elvis, which meant they'd already lost. Sam Phillips became a legend in his own right, the man who discovered Elvis Presley, the genius who heard what others missed. Sun Records became the birthplace of rock and roll. The acetate from Memphis recording service was moved to Graceland as Elvis bought the mansion in 1957. It sat in his personal collection, protected now, insured for $100,000. Journalists wanted to see it, touch it, hear it. The demo that cost $4 and represented 2 days' wages was now one of the most valuable pieces of vinyl in existence. The labels that rejected it never stopped hearing about their mistake. Annual reports would mention it, how close they came, what they'd missed. One no cost them hundreds of millions in revenue and defined their reputations for decades. The music industry changed its entire approach to talent scouting after Elvis. Trust the weird ones. Trust the ones who don't fit. The acetate proved that the future doesn't sound like the past, and the people guarding the past will always say no first. August 16th, 1977. Elvis died at Graceland. Within weeks, the mansion became a shrine. The original acetate from November 1953 was put on permanent display. Visitors stand in front of glass cases and look at the black vinyl disc with the pencil-written label, Elvis Presley, My Happiness. The disc nobody wanted, the demo that cost $4, the recording that every major label rejected. It's scratched now from years of replays, warped slightly from heat and time and hope wearing into the grooves. Marion Keisker's secret copy was donated to the Country Music Hall of Fame, proof that sometimes salvation is someone remembering when everyone else forgets. The labels that said no are still answering for it. Every music industry textbook includes the Elvis rejection as a case study in costly mistakes. Every A&R training program shows the acetate in presentations. This is what happens when you trust the template more than your ears. If the disc were ever sold, experts estimate it would bring over $1 million at auction. But it's not for sale. It sits behind glass in Memphis, proof that rejection and genius can share the same moment, separated only by time and someone refusing to quit. The laugh and the beg were always connected. 18 months of distance, one acetate disc of proof. Sometimes the world isn't ready. Sometimes you just have to survive long enough for the world to catch up. The disc is still playable. The scratches are still visible. And the lesson never gets old.